Hello, everyone, and thank you all for tuning in to our latest episode of our Brainfood Talks format. I am Thomas Pokorny, and today I have the pleasure of introducing Jerzy Kirchner, the head of cloud engineering here at Square. Jerzy will talk about unleashing the power of Backstage today, which I am also very curious about to hear already. Before we get right into the talk, a few words about the Brainfood Talks format itself. Here at Square, knowledge sharing is really an integral part of our culture. And with the Brainfood Talks, we also want to bring this to a broader audience and share it with the community. So you should be able to see a comment section at the right side of the screen. And please always feel free to use it or to initiate a discussion. And there also, of course, as always, will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. And with that said, I would like to hand over to Jerzy, and I wish all of our viewers an interesting and insightful Brainfood Talk.
Yes, thanks, Thomas. So, Thomas introduced me already. My name is Jerzy Kirchner. You will have the possibility during the session to ask questions in the chat. If you have any questions left, then you can also reach out to me via the square.link Jerzy. They will find my phone number, my LinkedIn address. So just feel free to drop something if you have questions left. So today in the session, we will be talking about Backstage. Backstage is currently a piece of software which many people are talking about. And today we want to explore why we even have Backstage, what you could do with it, and how does it fit into the overall landscape. So Backstage is an open source project. On the right side, you can see a picture of the CNCF landscape. So this is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape. And Backstage is one of the projects which is in the status of being incubating, meaning that Backstage is being funded with $3 million of dollars per year. In order to sponsor the development. And Backstage, just to give a bit of background, is a piece of software which has originally been created by Spotify. It exists for around 3 years now. So I think the first commit was more or less about 3 years ago. It currently has about 20,000 stars on GitHub. So you see a lot of people are liking this product and using it. And I think about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had over 1,000 contributors, and the number is growing. I checked just yesterday in the morning; it's now 1,030. So the number is growing. And the big question is, what is Backstage? So Backstage itself is naming itself to be a platform for building developer portals. And what it concretely means, we will explore in the next couple of minutes. So let's first understand where does Backstage sit. So when we are building software, we usually have something which we call an internal developer platform. And this is everything you have in order to create your software. So it might be your Kubernetes cluster, it might be your AWS accounts, it might be your monitoring and observability toolings like Datadog, it might be your CI and CD pipelines, and also what is running on top of the internal developer platform. So your workloads, your pieces of software which are running. And the Backstage is what we call an internal developer portal. And it sits on top of the platform and tries to give a view on what is going on inside. Yeah? So it tries to be the interface between the developer and the platform, and trying to give a good insight of what kind of software is currently running on it, what is the state of my software, and bringing things together. Maybe just a small fun fact, because when I was building the slides, I was realizing it, so Backstage is what we call the internal developer portal. Then we have what is the lower box is the internal developer platform. And most funny, there is another IDP on it. So because the internal developer platform is an IDP, internal developer portal is an IDP, and also Keycloak on the slide is quite funny to have used Backstage try to solve. So two problems. This one is what we call cognitive overload or cognitive load, and the second one is technology fragmentation. When we talk about cognitive load or overload, we mean with it following. There is, when we are working as engineers in our environments, usually we're exposed to a lot of software. There is a lot of moving pieces, and usually you're using a lot of different tools in your daily workflow. And by introducing Backstage, we try to reduce the cognitive load by simplifying your daily work and bringing, and bringing things together, which to one interface and to one overview. The second one is what we call technology fragmentation. Technology fragmentation means that as we have started to, let's say, making things more agile, what also happened is a lot of teams have received a lot of freedom in order to choose their software. And even if you look at the CNCF landscape, I think currently there is around about 2,000 tools on it. So there is a lot of possibility to choose different stacks. And what Backstage tries to do is to reduce this technology fragmentation and reducing your landscape to use a little bit less tools. So we will speak about this in more detail. So later on, we will speak about templates. So when we will talk about templates, we are actually trying to cover the topic of the technology fragmentation. So before talking too much about what Backstage is, I would say let's have a look at the software itself. So you should be able to see my screen. And this is how Backstage looks like. So Backstage is a web application. And what you can see here currently is a component which we call the Backstage components catalog. So, and the components catalog is an overview of what kind of pieces of components, software, resources we are owning in the company. So what do we try to solve with this problem is, maybe you have seen in the past situations where you have seen an API which is maybe crashing, maybe a piece of software which is not running properly. And it's quite difficult to even find out who is owning this piece of software and whom could I contact. And this is one of the main use cases which we try to solve with the catalog. So in my concrete case, I have only two components in my overview. So I don't have access to a production system at this moment. So I've tried to build a hopefully meaningful example. And we can see that there is two components inside. One is called the Magic Unicorn service, and we have also a Magic Unicorn web. I can immediately see which system both components belongs to. So the owning system is the so-called Silly system, and the owner of this component is called Team Rudel. And there is also some description. I can see that both of those components are in production currently. One is a service, one is a website, and so on. In this overview, I could also see different views on the same. For example, I could filter by systems. So my catalog currently has one system. Inside, I could also filter by APIs, and I also can see that my system has currently two APIs, one is called the Magic API, the other one is called the Pet Store. And what I would like to do is to dive a little bit deeper into the catalog functionality to fully understand what kind of capabilities we have. So I'm now currently inside the Magic Unicorn service, and I can see following view. The first one is a short description. What is the service about? So this gives quite a benefit because oftentimes descriptions, if they are not provided in a README file in a source code repository, it's oftentimes very difficult to even understand what is the service about, how could we explain it, and here we have a description of it. Second thing is we can start modeling relationships between these components. So here I have the Magic Unicorn service with a graph of dependencies. And I can see my Magic Unicorn service is consuming an API, which is called the BetStore service. It depends on a resource, which is called Magic Unicorn S3. So it's an S3 bucket, which it's consuming. And it has a subpart, which is called the Magic Unicorn Web. And on the other hand side, I also can see what is flowing into the service. Like the service is owned by Team Hoodle, it's belonging to Silly System, and it's providing the Magic API. And if I go a little bit further, let's see the Teams view. So I know that my service is belonging to Team Hoodle, and here I'm at the page where I see a full overview what Team Hoodle is made of. So Team Hoodle has 7 members. We can provide the email addresses and contact details of those persons, so it's easier to contact someone from the team. And we can also see a full overview of what kind of APIs or what kind of services this team is owning, and I can dive deeper and explore what is going on here. The second thing, which is quite interesting here, is every component is linked to a source code repository. So meaning I can always jump between the source code repository and the overview in the Backstage catalog where I have the connection. Another feature of the catalog is having the so-called tech docs. So tech docs is rendering me documentation about my component. And please don't read it. It's all generated with ChatGPT. I don't even know if it's useful or not. But the important thing is that the content of this rendered documentation always comes directly from the source code repository. So what it tries to address is the fact that many times we are writing documentation about our services into external sources like Wiki, like any kind of SharePoint or wherever, where in the moment we're updating our source code repository, this kind of documentation gets outdated immediately, and documentation and the truth are running apart. By rendering documentation from the source code repositories, we can make sure that if you have a good discipline of updating your documentation with your commits, things are always running in parallel and will not run apart. Another thing which I find very interesting in the catalog is the API functionality. So we have seen that 2 APIs are associated with my service. One was the Magic API and the other one was the BetStore. And we can see here in the catalog that the Magic API is something which we provide out of the Magic Unicorn service, and the BetStore is something which is consumed. So this is quite an interesting thing to see. I also can see that to which system it belongs, to which owner. And I also have, once I drill a bit deeper, I see the same overview of the API, and I find a definition of my API, and you can see I will have my Swagger definitions rendered. And I think this is quite a useful feature because many times companies are creating a lot of APIs, but they don't have a central place to store them and make them explorable and make them searchable by other teams. But teams are struggling quite a lot to even understand what kind of APIs could I use in my company, how do definitions look like. And with this functionality, we are bringing in the overview of the APIs and also the explorability or discovery of those APIs into the system. So as we are used to, we can look at what kind of information do I need to send in, what kind of information comes out of the APIs. Backstage does not only support Swaggers, as we see here, but it provides, it supports a lot of formats. For example, so Swagger and OpenAPI. We have async APIs. We can render gRPC and many other formats. GraphQL, for example, comes into my mind, where there's dedicated front ends where we can have the explorability of the APIs and can look what it's inside. Good. Now the big question is, how does the information come into Backstage? And we've just looked into the link to our source code repository. So let me open up this one once again for a second. And information does come into Backstage not by populating any kind of forms or entering it by hand, but this information comes from the source code repositories. And to be very specific, inside your source code repository, you are creating a file which is called catalog info YAML. And this is the information which Backstage is reading and interpreting. And by this information, it's populating its catalog and building up all other functionality. So you will see that my catalog info YAML is quite big and long. So in a real world scenario, you would not find it like this. So I would say this is due to my test setup here. Usually those individual pieces would be split apart multiple repositories, but for simplicity, I have put it together. And you can see that the specification are happening in the very same format as we usually define Kubernetes resources. So we have API version, which is pointing to Backstage. We have a kind system in our case. So you can remember that I was looking at systems in the catalog before. So the system is the silly system. And this is how it's defined. We are saying there is a system which is called silly system. This is the name of it, a description, some links, who is the owner, and so on. We also defined here inside an API, the pet store API. We are defining another API, the magic API. And we are defining the components. So the component would be what we have seen before, the magic unicorn component, or the magic unicorn service, which we have seen. And this is where we put things together. So I could provide tags here inside, links to my component. We have also seen this graph, which was showing what I'm depending on and what I'm consuming. So this is what I'm specifying here in this depends on, provides API, consumes API. This is how things are being sticked together. On the API side, I want to point out one thing. So you see that in the API specification, we can see that the definition for the API, I can define where to find the Open API specification. It's being found in my local folder under spec Open API. So let me jump back one step. And you will see that here under the folder spec, there is my Open API YAML, and here I am pulling the information from. So whenever I am changing the YAML specification for my Open API, my catalog is going to be updated because it's pulling from the very same repository. So, and let's come to the annotations because they are also quite interesting. With the annotations, we are defining where different pieces of Backstage is pulling information from. So here, for example, we have the Backstage tag.ref. So Backstage tag.ref is, we've seen before that inside our system, let me jump back to the component. We have our documentation. So where does this documentation come from, and how does Backstage even understand what to show there? It's coming from the Backstage IO tag.ref, and it says it's coming from a directory, and it's located in the root. So if I'm looking at the root of my directory, I will see that there is my mkdocs. So there's a piece of software which is specifically made to create documentations. So here I'm defining that I have a home and another chapter, and that my documentation is located in the docs folder. And inside the docs folder, I can see my index MD and other MD, which are containing exactly the content which will be shown. So meaning that I can pull from multiple sources, I can pull in my information. And sorry for jumping around so much in my folders. Very good. So the next thing which I want to point out is this entry here, github.com project slug. And so I am defining how, where is my GitHub project. So my source code is located in GitHub. And here I'm annotating where to find my project. And this gives me a couple of benefits here in Backstage. And let me change back. By providing this annotation, I will gain a new entry here in my overview of the component. And this is the CI/CD part. And what I can see is that it gives me an overview of my GitHub actions. So meaning I am pulling the information from GitHub right into Backstage, and I'm linking it to the proper component. And this is where I said that Backstage is giving you a view on the underlying components. It provides actually the possibility to pull in from different sources of external pieces of software the information about your component into one central place, which is Backstage. So what I can do here, instead of jumping to my GitHub repository, I could explore my last workflows. I see the status is completed. I can have a more detailed view of which steps are completed and which are not. I could even see my job log and explore from within Backstage what is currently happening. And if we jump to Backstage.io, you can see that they have here a plugin section. So meaning that you can incorporate a lot of plugins into Backstage to bring the information together. Let's say in order to deploy your software, you are using Argo CD, and it would be quite nice to see within the component whether it's healthy or not. This is what the Argo CD plugin is doing. So if I'm scrolling down here a little bit, I will see if I incorporate it properly. Then a new window will pop up saying that Argo CD, my component guest book, it's synced, it's healthy, and when it was deployed the last time. How would I tell to Backstage which Argo CD application to look at? We again do it with the annotations, which I've shown you before. So under the metadata, I will add under the annotation Argo CD app name. I say, what is the name of my application inside Argo CD? And Argo CD will pull, sorry, not Argo CD, Backstage will pull this information together and show it in one place. What else could I do with it? I could add, for example, a Datadog dashboard, or even multiple of the Datadog dashboards in order to see what is currently going on with my component. I could display architecture decision records if I wanted. So there's a lot of possibilities to pull in data from outside, meaning that there is a lot of plugins being developed by the community, which help to pulling in this information. But you also have the possibility to create your own. Let's say you have your own applications for continuous delivery. Then if those system has APIs, you could create a plugin and incorporate it into your dashboards in order to make things visible at one side. So, and this is what I was talking about, that we try to reduce cognitive load by showing you information from a lot of systems at one central place. And this is probably also what we talk about when we say that Backstage is a platform to create developer portals, because by pulling together all the information which is relevant for your company, you are building your developer portal on your own and pulling in the plugins which you need. Good. So let's talk about another piece. We just need a second. Very good. The second important thing which we are covering with Backstage is the so-called golden paths. And I think every one of us has been working for a company which is somewhere on this line, which I'm showing on the slide. So either you are in a company which is heavily going into the direction of standardization, or is going heavily into autonomy. So being heavily on the standardization side, meaning you might be working in a company where there is heavy governance, where there is little selected tools which can be used. And usually from a developer's perspective, this is not being appreciated, because oftentimes people are feeling too much restricted in doing innovation in order to have autonomy. And such kind of companies are usually restricting the usage of software quite strictly. On the other hand side of the spectrum, you could be maybe in a quite small company where you have an organization where people are saying you can choose whatever piece of software you want. We don't care. Just make sure that you're as fast as possible in delivering. So everyone is happy because people can choose the software which they are most familiar with in using, or they are the fastest in. But there is one downside with this autonomy. Autonomy does not scale properly. So if you have 20 or 30 teams which are having full autonomy, then you run into the problem that you are solving maybe the same problem in 5 different programming languages. Maybe you are using Angular and React and Vue and maybe some other front end frameworks. And meaning if you want to do any kind of changes on a larger scale, you suddenly are restricted by having this different pieces of technology. And instead of being faster, you're suddenly getting much slower than if things would have been standardized. And this is what we call the speed paradox. And on the other hand side, if everything has been standardized before, then it's anyway clear what to do, right? If I have 3 programming languages which I can choose from, or even 1 only, it's only a matter of creating the business logic, and there is not too much which I could do wrong. So you see, from a speed perspective, from a maintainability perspective, it behaves completely opposite to what developers like. Still, both directions are important. So we want to have autonomy, but also standardization is important. And this is where golden paths come in. So golden paths try to be in the very middle of this journey. So golden paths are templates which are being used in order to define what does my, for example, perfect Java backend for providing REST APIs look like. What are our company standards? What are the best practices? And we put everything into this template and use it as a golden path. And this golden path is having probably 2 differences to the pure standardization, because if we create templates, if we create a golden path, it's kind of a standardization. But with the standardization, we don't want to restrict people. So there is one thing which is special about golden paths is that there is not only one golden path, but there might be a lot of golden paths. So there might be a golden path for creating a front end for customers in React, because it must be nice and shiny. And there might be another golden path where I'm creating a less fancy front end for my own employees, which is maybe less troublesome to maintain and much quicker to develop. The second thing which is important is, as we are creating templates from which we instantiate source code repositories, it allows me to leave the golden path. So what does it mean? I'm instantiating, for example, a REST backend in Java. There is a certain things pre-configured, but if I don't like them, I can just leave the golden path and say, no, I need something else. I need to do innovation. So I am leaving the golden path. What you must know is, once you leave the golden path, you go to the dark forest and you are being left alone. So you better think twice or thrice if you want to leave the golden path. So this is the basic idea behind. And going away from the theory and back to the practical parts, let me open up Backstage again. So how are golden paths implemented into Backstage? You have here on the left side, you have a section which is called the templates. And my imaginary company has created a template which allows me to quickly create REST backends written in the programming language Brainfuck, because this is what we are specialized in. And I will show now the perspective of the user. So I can actually take this template and I will be guided through a form where I can easily instantiate such a REST backend quite easily. So in my special case, I'm creating a component. Let me call it delete me 99 so I don't forget about it later. I will associate it with a team. So we've seen that team Rudel has been named already in as a user group in my company. So I go next. It asks me about my GitHub account and the repository name. And it also asks me a question. So should we add the community folder? What I want you to understand is that this kind of form, which I'm showing to you right now, it's absolutely individual to the template and the golden path you are building. So you are defining and deciding on your own what questions you ask to the user in order to create a new software component. And you see also with these check marks, I can even have a little bit of dynamicity inside saying, do I want to change something about this repository or not? So let me go to the next steps. What will happen now is Backstage will fire up a workflow and run through a couple of steps. And also those steps are super individual, so from template to template, so we can decide on our own. The outcome of my template is that we have created a repository. So let me see my repository. So under my user account in GitHub, I have now created the delete me 99 component, and there is a couple of things inside. So you see the README file has been already pre-instantiated with the correct component name. I have been ticking the checkbox to include the community folder. So inside my README, I can see this repo includes the community folder, and I also see the community folder inside. You see that some documentation has been already pre-initialized for me, and a catalog info has been established and pre-populated with the right information. So what the template allows me is to kickstart my project very quickly. Plus, what we see is that we can register the components. Oh, sorry, let me go back to the catalog. You see that my component immediately has been registered as delete me 99. It has been associated with the Silly system. It has been associated with the team Rudel. So let's look very quickly how to define such a template. So I go back to create, and you also see that templates are coming from GitHub. So here is the link to my template. And inside such a template folder, there is one important file. It's the template.yaml. And there is a couple of parts to this template YAML. It tells me what is it's of kind template. It has a scaffold, Backstage IO API version. And then we come to the important part. You see this parameters section. And in this parameter section, everything is defined what you have seen in the front end. So you see that I've asked about the component name, about the owner, about the system, and about the repo URL. And this is how it's specified. I specify inside the YAML what kind of questions do I want to ask to my user. And ideally, I ask them as little questions as possible and derive some default values for my template as much as possible. The second part of my template is the so-called steps. And the steps is what you have seen. There is this little workflow running. And here I specify what should be executed. So the first step was to fetch a template. And where to fetch the template from? Sorry, here the action is called fetch template. And the template is fetched from my local repository inside the templates folder. So let's look at this one very quickly. So you see I have here a templates folder. And inside my templates folder, I have some like the base structure of the repository, which I've instantiated. And I can use variables, I can use if statements and whatsoever in order to make my repository dynamic. So what is behind is there is a templating engine, which is called Nunjucks behind. So if you want, you can get quite crazy with putting in logic into your templates and make them quite dynamic and quite complex if you need to. So, and then we can see another one which I want to point out is we are fetching another repository, and it's should be stored inside community and where to pull it from an external URL. So you see that I'm not only able to define my templates from a local repository, but I also am able to use overlays and put on top and on top of the very same repository to build something more complex and something more useful. Good. Let me switch back to the slides. So now the big question is, we have seen in that Backstage is instantiating source code repositories with the templating engine. And we also have kind of a workflow functionality inside. So it might be a little bit tempting to automate stuff inside Backstage, which usually might belong to a CI pipeline or should be maybe automated somewhere else. So if you are instantiating templates or doing anything with Backstage, you always should treat it in the following way. If Backstage is down for 5 days, you should still be able to do your daily work as a developer, because Backstage is just, as we said in the beginning, kind of a glass plane on top of things. Maybe it's a little bit of a remote on top of things, but it should not be a crucial component which you cannot survive without. Whatever Backstage is scaffolding for you, whatever Backstage is creating for you, you should always have the possibility to use your alternate tools in order to recreate the very same by hand. This is the responsibility model, which in my opinion works the best. Then I think if you're using Backstage, there is also a couple of things which you should consider. So the first thing is it's all JavaScript. So there is probably a couple of people which love JavaScript, but you must be aware of one thing. If you're installing Backstage, it's not delivered as a binary, which you're just installing and running. And whenever there comes an update, you're just throwing the new binary at your Kubernetes cluster or however you deploy it. But during the installation time of Backstage, you are instantiating a source code repository of Backstage. So you will get a portion which is a front-end written in TypeScript, a back-end written in TypeScript. And whenever you're updating your Backstage version from, let's say, version 2 to 3, you will be provided with a set of instructions that you need to add 5 lines of code here, remove 2 lines of code there, in order to keep your Backstage instance updated. This has the downside that you need a full stack TypeScript developer who is maintaining your Backstage instance. But on the other hand side, it gives you a lot of freedom, right? You are changing the source code. You can adapt Backstage to whatever you need and what are your likings inside your company, which is also why we have in the beginning said Backstage is a platform to create developer portals. You have the freedom to bring in your own business logic and your own things. The second thing which you need to be aware of is introducing a developer portal. And I think this is independent, whether it's Backstage or any other product, which is a developer portal. The introduction needs time. What does it mean? So just providing a developer portal to developers is not bringing too much of a value, because you will have an empty developer portal. There is no components inside. There is no templates inside. And the usefulness and the real value of Backstage comes only then when you have proper content, which speeds up developers in doing the daily work. And in order to achieve this, you will need to invest in introducing Backstage, meaning you will need to go to your platform teams and ask them to create maybe plugins to display certain information inside Backstage. You will need to reach out to maybe application teams which are creating templates in order to put in all the knowledge which they have gathered from maybe creating a front end. So it's an investment. You must be aware of it, and it takes time to introduce it. And I think the third very important piece of information which I want to give to you is about the templates. So creating templates, I would say it's quite quickly done. But what you must be aware of is that having templates inside Backstage, once you have created them, you need to treat them as a real product. So the worst thing which could happen is that you are creating a template which works for maybe 1 week, another, then you're updating some libraries and some packages, and whatever you have generated as part of the template suddenly is broken. If things start breaking and the engineers who are using the developer portal try to use those broken templates, they will need to invest their time in order to figure out why the instantiated repository does not work. They will immediately start losing the trust inside templates and will not use it. So meaning the only way to counterfight this is to treat your templates as part of your product. It must be maintained, it must be tested. You need to have a discipline whenever you are updating, let's say maybe portions of your backend frameworks, that you're also revalidating that your templates are working and they are fine. Yes, and having said this, I want to wrap up. So Backstage is a tool which helps us to reduce cognitive load. So reducing cognitive load we can achieve by bringing things into one dashboard, by providing you up-to-date documentation, by rendering a catalog and making it very explorable. And on the other hand side, we have the reduction of the technology fragmentation, which on one hand side is done by providing plugins where you can see everything at one place, and also using templates and golden paths. If you have something which is really useful, you will be maybe not tempted anymore to recreate something new, but use whatever is proven. Cool. And having said that, I'm now at the end of my talk. And before we come to the closing and the Q&A session, I want to take the time to announce 2 short things. So first, let me introduce the next talk for the Brainfood Talks. It will be about data migration approaches for legacy modernization. What does it mean? Whenever you have decomposed your monoliths, you would probably quite quickly realize that dealing with data creates quite a problem. So Christoph will give way how to deal with those situations and some patterns how to resolve this. And the second thing which I want to announce is we are sponsoring, or not sponsoring, but we are the founders of Codecraft, which is a conference for architects. So if you are if you want to learn something about architecture, you want to see like-minded people, I think Codecraft is a perfect place to go. It will take place on 1st of June and until 18th of March, which I believe is somewhere end of this week or next week. You can have still early bird tickets, so meaning that the price is lower. And from 19th of March, we will go over to a regular ticket sale. So it's your chance to save your tickets, and hopefully we'll see each other there. So then thanks a lot, and we can go to the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Jerzy, for this extremely interesting and also insightful talk. As a software engineer myself, I'm always curious about reducing cognitive load, so thank you for the insights here. Let me check the Q&A chat real quick. So far, we have no questions there. Maybe let's wait for another minute if we find one. Anything else that you would like to share about Backstage that wasn't in the part of this lecture?
Yes, maybe 1 or 2 things. Yeah. So I mean, as I said, so if you're installing Backstage, you will need to maintain your source code on your own, which might be troublesome for some of the teams. I said it gives you a lot of flexibility to build whatever you want, but you need to invest in it. There is a couple of alternatives. One is being Rody. So Rody is a company, I think their homepage is Rody.io, if I'm not mistaken. And they are, for example, offering you Backstage as a service. which might be useful for certain companies. However, if you want to create your own plugins, if you want to create maybe your own actions inside the templates, this is probably not the right choice to do because as it's an as a service provider, you will not be able to deploy your own source code. At least this was the case probably a year ago. But it might be an alternative, yeah. And whatever I was speaking of in terms of templates, I think these rules are probably quite universal, right? So it does matter whether you're using Backstage or any other product where you can create templates, where you can make the lives of engineers easier. They are behaving exactly the same as Backstage would do in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Then I have one question from my side.
Sure.
As someone who is always very, let's say, curious and eager to play around with different technologies, would you say that Backstage is something that, for instance, pays off as someone who might use it for a private project, or is it something that would be an overkill for such a situation?
It depends. So I think the catalog, if you look at the catalog in your private projects, you probably don't need it because I don't assume that you have hundreds of components which you try to maintain and keep an overview of. So I would say no. The templating engine might be something which is useful for yourself. So if you have ever figured out the perfect way of writing small services for your personal use, it's definitely worth. The big question is whether you would use the whole surrounding of Backstage or you would just create the underlying templating engine for those kinds of use cases. So I would say for a single developer, it does not pay off probably too much. But once you are going into a team and especially going into a distributed setup where people maybe don't know each other and there is hundreds of developers, a tool like Backstage and having the catalog and the templating engine, I think at this moment of time, it pays off a lot.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Yeah, thank you very much for your elaborate opinion and knowledge here on this one. So let me just check. We didn't get any new questions. So
Cool.
I would say thank you all for tuning in and see you at the next Brainfood Talk.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.